Another common problem is with handheld shots that aren't particularly stable or smooth in their camera movements. In this particular shot, you can see where the very end of the camera move is rather abrupt. The camera sort of hits a stop. You can also see that it's bouncing up and down rather than being a completely smooth horizontal pan. A lot of these problems can be cured by things such as better tripods, stabilizer rigs you can wear while moving, or just a lot more experience, but it's sometimes hard to go back and wish after the fact. You're given what you're given and you have to make it look good. Well, a good tool for shots like this is the Warp Stabilizer, which again is part of both After Effects and Premiere Pro. I'll select my clip, go into Effects, search for Warp or Stabilizer, and apply that onto my clip. Premiere Pro will automatically analyze every frame of this footage looking for common pixels or objects or identifiable marks that it can follow from frame to frame. It will then use that to reverse engineer the camera movement in the shot and then create a newly smooth camera movement to replace what was originally in the footage. Here's the playback of the smooth shot, particularly that ending is much smoother. You don't see the bouncing up and down on the camera, the takeoff was good, and again watch that ending. It settles down very smoothly into the end pose rather than hitting an end stop and bouncing. Now if you want, you can just set this and forget it. If you really have to, you can focus on just a couple parameters if you wanted to. Say increase the amount of smoothness. If there was too much bouncing, for example, still in the shot, you can increase the smoothing even beyond 100% to even further smooth out this new superimposed camera move. No need to reanalyze, but it did need to restabilize the shot to impose that new camera movement. There is also an option to have no motion. Now, if the camera should have been more or less locked down, but was just wandering around, that'll work well. However, if you have a camera pan such as this, it doesn't work so well because we're going in and out of the shot. The result of stabilizing a shot with no motion would merely have the elephant entering and leaving a cropped frame. Not very useful for a panning shot, but great if something should have been on a tripod in the first place. Let's take a peek underneath the hood to get a better understanding what Warp Stabilizer is actually doing. And you can see that by looking at borders, framing, and the auto scale parameter underneath. You might have noticed that after we stabilized, the shot got a little bit larger. That's because Premiere scaled up the shot to cover black borders around the edge as it was attempting to move and rotate the image and keep everything nicely framed. To get a better idea of all those movements it's performing, change the framing to Stabilize Only. Here you'll see the black borders as it's trying to recenter the shot and get an idea of the micro corrections it's having to do frame by frame to create that nice smooth camera motion. Now you have a little bit more appreciation for it. You can also see by putting the cursor over the Burn-In logo at the right to get an idea of what sort of counter movement Premiere Pro is doing to smooth out this move. You really saw it there at the end. Stabilize and crop basically creates a really clean picture-in-picture. Rather than seeing those ragged edges bounce around, it just crops inward as much as necessary to create nice clean edges and still present a smooth shot inside those borders. One step up from that is what you saw, Stabilize, Crop, and Auto Scale. Scale the footage up just enough so you don't see black edges, but instead the image fills the screen. It does get a little bit softer, but you no longer have to hide the edges. And if you like, you can even set the maximum you can scale it up by, in other words, how soft it's going to get. Or say, you know, I have a bezel on a TV that's going to crop off, say, 2 or 3% of the image. There's no need to zoom up that much. The viewer may not see that black border. Don't zoom the footage up quite as much as you had to. However, if you're going to do this for web viewing, whether you are going to see edge to edge, you want to keep that at the default of 0. There is another option called Synthesize Edges, which is very cool, particularly if you have a shot that should have been on a tripod and the camera was wobbling around. What Synthesize Edges does is say, you know, on this frame I might have some black border. However, earlier or later in time, some of those pixels I need were in the shot as the camera wobbled around. Let's copy and paste those pixels into this frame to help cover those edges. You don't see that so much during panning shots, but you would see it when you have wobbly shots at the end. It defaults to looking a half second earlier or later in time. You can change this range to look even further to grab pixels even earlier or even later. Again, good for what should have been tripod shots. There is some rolling shutter repair, and some other abilities to automatically crop out gunk around the edges when it is borrowing edge pixels to paste back in. But quite often, the default settings yield pretty nice results. In the cases where they don't yield pretty nice results, you might need a more advanced version of Warp Stabilizer that's in After Effects, and that's what we'll cover in the next and final movie of this course.